global war is often imagined as a sudden nuclear strike. In reality, it begins with the silent failure of a system snapping under pressure. Historically, conflict explodes over territory. Today, the spark is an isolated oil tanker crossing the ocean, a blocked commercial shipping lane, a sudden loss of trust in a global currency. Understanding these events requires looking past the headlines and studying the map. Beneath the borders, an invisible scaffolding exists. Thousands of miles of energy pipelines, shipping lanes, and financial networks that keep the modern world alive. The argument from geopolitical strategists is shifting. Superpowers are no longer positioning themselves full economy breathing. Consider the scale of global maritime trade. Roughly 90% of physical goods travel by water, but the oceans are far from open highways. These trade routes are forced to condense. They funnel into a handful of narrow geographic gaps called choke points. These tiny, localized bottlenecks dictate the flow of trillions of dollars in commerce. Physical access to these narrow corridors determines the economic survival of nations half a world away. Geographically, Iran functions as a fortress. The nation is defined by rugged mountains that make it exceptionally difficult to invade or control through traditional means. This mountain range provides a permanent, elevated vantage point looking directly down at the Strait of Hormuz, the primary energy artery on Earth. Iran utilizes this geography to exert asymmetric leverage. Regional proxies, swarms of drones, and mobile missile systems are positioned to monitor and threaten the shipping lanes from the safety of the peaks. Military leverage in this context is measured by the capability to sever the global energy supply chain at a moment's notice, surpassing the need for a traditional ground invasion. If that choke point is squeezed, the reaction is immediate. Energy flowing out of the Middle East feeds the industrial bases of Asia and fuels the economies of Europe. Block the flow, and a cascade begins. Within days, factories starve. Manufacturing halts. The supply chains delivering food, electronics, and medicine freeze. This vulnerability explains why the United States military focuses heavily on maritime dominance. A core objective of the U.S. Navy is to physically secure these trade routes and keep them open by force. This is where the map explains the conflict. A physical blockage in the Middle East triggers an existential economic crisis for every major industrial power on the planet. Beyond physical geography resides a second, more expansive choke point, a system built on paper and code, the U.S. dollar. Geopolitical analysts argue that the true scaffolding of American power is the ability to use the financial system as a weapon. By controlling networks like SWIFT, the U.S. can sanction economies and freeze assets without firing a shot. Rivals recognize this vulnerability. To survive, they are building alternative economic coalitions to bypass American leverage. The BRICS alliance, including Russia and China, is constructing new trade networks. Their motivation is to de-risk their economies from the dollar. This interpretation of global finance suggests that the financial system is the supreme theater of modern warfare. Bypassing it has become the top priority for adversarial powers. The global chessboard is defined by different forms of leverage. The U.S. holds the dollar and the sea. Meanwhile, China holds industrial power and Russia holds the land and the energy. This creates an escalation trap. When one nation makes a defensive maneuver to protect its own vulnerability, the other side perceives it as a direct offensive threat. The global system is so tightly wound that the very actions intended to secure it are what trigger the conflict. Every rational move pushes the board closer to the edge. The battlefield is expanding. Systemic warfare has moved into the digital realm of data surveillance, narrative control, and artificial intelligence. Paralyzing a nation's critical infrastructure no longer requires soldiers on the ground. The same devastation can be achieved remotely through malicious code or unmanned platforms. The deep integration of global systems creates an acute fragility. A world-altering event initially takes the form of a blocked shipping lane, a frozen bank account, a drone strike, or